last 2 years, we spoke out in support of peace, security, and prosperity. We raised our voice against terrorism. During the last 2 years, we spoke out in support of peace, security, and prosperity. We did not hesitate in raising our voice against the common enemies of humanity, such as terrorism. We were the voice of the entire global South, and we reinforced our commitment to the basic principles, including multilateralism, rule of law, and a fair and equitable international system. Since you've asked me whether there were any highlights, I would say there were several that I can think of. For one, we raised our voice against terrorism through these 2 years, bringing attention to its various expressions, which need to be addressed by the international community through solidarity and unity. In October 2022, and as you all know, we brought the Security Council, or should I say the famous horseshoe table, to India for the very first time, adopting the Delhi Declaration, where the Security Council spoke with one voice in countering terrorism in all its forms and manifestations. Then, keeping up this momentum, we piloted a presidential statement on counter-terrorism under our December presidency, where we once again brought the Council together in presenting a united front against terrorism. The Council this time condemned cross-border terrorist attacks. Acts of terrorism seriously impair the enjoyment of human rights. India has faced the horrors of cross-border terrorism for decades before the world took serious note of it. At the beginning of our tenure in January 2021, you would recall that the External Affairs Minister had presented an 8-point action plan for the UN system to credibly address the menace of terrorism and ensure effective action. As I've already mentioned, as the chair of the Counter-Terrorism Committee, we raised the profile of this committee. The special meeting of the committee held in India in October 2022, to which I've already alluded, resulted in the landmark Delhi Declaration. This was followed up by a presidential statement on counter-terrorism in December during the course of our current presidency, which emphasized several of the points from the 8-point action plan that was proposed by the External Affairs Minister last year. For instance, the Council this time condemned cross-border terrorist attacks, called on all member states to summon the requisite political will to denounce all acts of terrorism, urged member states to ensure that listing and delisting proposals of individuals and entities under Security Council sanctions are evidence-based, reaffirmed member states' obligations to prevent and suppress the financing of terrorist acts, underlined that acts of terrorism seriously impair the enjoyment of human rights, and urged member states to deny safe haven to and bring to justice, extradite, or prosecute the perpetrators. Now, as we all know, India has faced the horrors of cross-border terrorism for decades before the world took serious note of it. We have lost many innocent lives, and all the while, we have fought terrorism resolutely and with zero tolerance. We will continue to do so, and as our Prime Minister has stated, not rest till terrorism is uprooted. Whenever we spoke in the Security Council, we were not only conscious that we were representing the voice of 140 crore Indians. India's views have been sensitive to African priorities and the needs of the African countries. We were also the voice of the Global South in raising their concerns on global issues. Whenever we spoke in the Security Council, we were not only conscious that we were representing the voice of 140 crore Indians, but also the collective voice of the Global South and their aspirations and their demands. For instance, given that the agenda of the Council is dominated by Africa-related issues, India's views have been sensitive to African priorities and the needs of the African countries. This has been in keeping with the vision enunciated at the highest level of our leadership and their commitment to Africa. We were determined to ensure, therefore, that African countries under sanctions are helped to come out of them rather than be burdened with unrealistic benchmarks and expectations. We were also the voice of the Global South in raising their concerns on global issues, in particular in the aftermath of the Ukraine conflict, While emphasizing our principal position on the conflict itself, we also highlighted that the impact of the conflict is being felt even in distant regions in terms of surging costs and actual shortages of food grains, fertilizers, and fuel. And this was not a hypothetical concern either. We saw that during the COVID pandemic, the Global South was disproportionately affected because of hoarding of vaccines. While we adopted national policies to ensure such a situation did not happen again, we also explained the concerns of the developing world using the forum of the Security Council. We also walked the talk in that we provided humanitarian assistance to our friends and partners from the Global South where this was needed. And as to what was the response from the developing world, let me put it this way. I think there was an expectation from India on the part of everyone. And there has been a sense of appreciation that we did live up to those expectations. India supports any peace effort. India has called upon both sides to return to the path of diplomacy and dialogue, and has also expressed its support for all diplomatic efforts to end the conflict. The Indian Prime Minister has spoken to the presidents of Ukraine and Russia on multiple occasions and reiterated India's position. Since the beginning of the conflict in Ukraine, India has consistently called for an immediate cessation of hostilities and an end to the violence. India has called upon both sides to return to the path of diplomacy and dialogue, and has also expressed its support for all diplomatic efforts to end the conflict. The Indian Prime Minister, has spoken to the presidents of Ukraine and Russia on multiple occasions and reiterated India's position, including with President Zelensky of Ukraine on 27 December this year. The External Affairs Minister has also explained our stance on multiple occasions. As far as your question on what role India is playing, I can only quote what the Indian Prime Minister told President Zelensky recently, that India supports any peace effort, and we are committed to continue providing humanitarian assistance to the affected civilian population.